Hey guys, this is Rurouni K95 here. Once again, time for a manga review video. Yes. Today, we already took a look back on reviewing 6 volumes of the Inuyasha manga volumes on here. Today, I'm going to be covering another volume on here, and that is Inuyasha Volume 7 for today's manga review video. Yeah, this is the one I'm wanting to review something which I haven't thought of doing one before, which I should have done until now. So, let's begin on how the story progresses in there. In the chapters on here. Scroll 1, A Matter of Arms on here. So this basically tells how the army of those renegades noticed something of how what they thought it was a demon, which they didn't know if it was Sesshomaru. So Sesshomaru has used his powers of the arm like with the blood on that you can see right here on there, and he fights off those those blokes who's causing all in the renegade battlefield war zone like this. Until Master Jockin congratulated Sesshomaru about how he has to fight off those renegades as well. Especially how if he could have known, but he doesn't realize of how something's in plain sight of how he says the demon with the better arm of his wrath as well. If he could have known about how what Inuyasha did to him as well, that he basically could have realized if his arm is there until he met someone who is mysterious, that he's the one who despises Inuyasha, until someone who has found the arm of Sesshomaru, basically, especially of how they said it was a human arm, basically, when they noticed the Shikon jewel, and with the arm of any human, of how it grips the demon blade, of how it possesses, of how the wolf's fang is like the enchanted to protect humans, particularly, of how they're despising Inuyasha, particularly, of someone who is called Naraku. Yeah, that's the first appearance of Naraku as well, because he has first appeared from out of nowhere. By this time as well, Kagome and Inuyasha wanted to realize of how they were there, as well as Miroku as well, for the relaxation of how. But then Inuyasha wanted to ask the spiritual question to Miroku of how is there a place if you ever define a place to sleep, if they could figure out as well of how exorcists call a little white lie, what Miroku told Inuyasha, basically, how have things been making up, if there's anything they could figure out, basically. But they didn't realize if there was the aura of a Shikon shard, if they want to know. It's like a demon. Until Inuyasha notices something from the distance, which is something like that caused a brouhaha from above, until it was some sort of a demon-like monster that's causing chaos in the town, basically. And Inuyasha knew it's Sesshomaru in this scene. Scroll 2, The Power of the Wolf's Fang. Inuyasha knew that Sesshomaru is still alive, because he thought if Sesshomaru was dead, but he was wrong, as particularly of how, if they could realize of how the battle goes between Sesshomaru and Inuyasha, has still, when and also how Moroku and Kagome and Shippo noticed something of how it's a half breed Inuyasha, basically of how the something of how they went after the blade, especially of how it's repelled with the magic shield of how this goes. So Inuyasha and Sesshomaru starts the fight as particularly, especially when Inuyasha wanted to kill Sesshomaru with the Tetsaiga as well, but he couldn't because it's the part of the it was obvious basically of how something, because it was the poisonous claw what Sesshomaru has particularly, but if Inuyasha could have got the chance to destroy it, but Sesshomaru has to battle it all in the bloody fight with Inuyasha as well, particularly what you see in this one as well, particularly of how when he grabs the Tetsaiga, and Inuyasha thought that Sesshomaru is holding the Tetsaiga, is particularly of how the demons are wrecking, cause havoc, of how this basically, if they could know, but Sesshomaru has said that the Master of the Blade could slay every army of demons. Inuyasha, Moroku, and Kagome noticed of how it's shocking that Sesshomaru killed all the army of demons. And now he says that it's Inuyasha's turn as well. Scroll 3. The Sting of the Victory. When Inuyasha realized of how what he could have done that if it wasn't for Sesshomaru, Kagome thought could have been killed. So she has to defend Inuyasha because she thought that Sesshomaru was going to kill him basically. But Inuyasha told Kagome to stay out of the trouble as well, of how they want to know something of what's going on, if they could have understand, particularly of how this happened, as how this things is going why. Besides from after, of how they noticed, of how, with the appearance of how, if they could figure out if they fight off that monster, particularly. So Sesshomaru notices that Moroku uses the wind tunnel to get rid of all those demon-like monsters as well. And as well as all the army of those demon-like monster-like wasps as well. So this leaves up to Inuyasha to fight off those demon wasps as well, because something just happened to Moroku's arm, so Kagome could have got the medicine for Moroku. So Inuyasha uses the Claws of Blood to fight off Sesshomaru because Sesshomaru has the Tetsaiga in its own, particularly how this basically goes. Meanwhile, Sesshomaru knew that it was not that easy to fight off in the battle with Inuyasha, of how he's preparing the Tetsaiga, as how this goes, particularly when Inuyasha uses the blood claws, basically, of how wondered how this goes, particularly when Inuyasha defends himself from not getting killed by Sesshomaru as well, particularly of how they wanted to go as until this wasn't long until Kagome has used the arrow. Oh, so she can shoot off Sesshomaru to shoot his left arm off. Chapter 4. Arm robbery. So Kagome wanted to sever Sesshomaru's arm, and Sesshomaru noticed that Kagome is there. But Inuyasha told Kagome to run, but Kagome still wants to fight off Sesshomaru. But then Sesshomaru thought he could have killed Kagome, but Inuyasha has put a stop up to this as well, but Sesshomaru dodges of how they've realized about how the arm of Sesshomaru basically of how it's the arm of the human as well, particularly. And on top of this, Sesshomaru has to, in the battle between his opponent and Inuyasha, particularly of how this goes, you may have want to know questionable ways. Sesshomaru, however, wanted to know Jockin that if there's full of wasp venom, of how if he's in pain, the pain of the frustration, basically how it's got to him as well. And Sesshomaru said he could rest a little while so he would not be dead. So, by this time, Kagome has arrived and then has got the medicines to cure Moroku as well, because Moroku has been in pain as well. So Inuyasha is still in the battle with Sesshomaru, basically, is how this wanted to go, particularly. So she was aiming at the arm at Sesshomaru, particularly. So Inuyasha basically has to save Kagome from getting killed, particularly. But this is how its own consideration of the fact of how this happens. Scroll 5. Reclamation. When this happens, of how if Kagome was unconscious or dead, particularly, so he thought that Sesshomaru would not involve Kagome particularly. So Moroku is still alive, so he could have fight off until something happens, as what Inuyasha warns Sesshomaru, basically, if they could have realized. If Inuyasha could fight off against Sesshomaru in the battle, when Moroku saw that Inuyasha has to fight off Sesshomaru in a bloody-like battle, particularly. But Kagome is still alive because she has been unconscious when her awoken as well. When Inuyasha is still fighting Sesshomaru, he's finally got the Tetsaiga back. That Inuyasha finally has the pain, because something has it's off of Sesshomaru's hand as well, but Sesshomaru feel no pain in it. So when Inuyasha has to fight, I only use the Tetsaiga because he's been wanted to do this, particularly if he swings that blade as well, particularly of how this goes. But Inuyasha feels in pain, particularly of how this happens. Something that causes Kagome that if Inuyasha feels unconsciously. Scroll 6. Separate ways. As the progresses goes is how the art, if Sesshomaru suppose of how that Akin knows the skin of the arm, which is around Sesshomaru's own flesh, as particularly as how. Meanwhile, from somewhere else, Naraku said that both fail as how he sees the arm of Sesshomaru when Sesshomaru arrived, particularly how they're ordered to capture the to retrieve the Shikon jewel shard as well, where Naraku has lent Sesshomaru as well, particularly. But wasn't until Sesshomaru wants to fight Naraku, but Naraku disappeared, particularly because he disappeared without a trace. That's how he mirages. If he sees another to kill Inuyasha, if he calls upon again, particularly. Meanwhile, from there, other than Inuyasha cuts off Sesshomaru's arm, and as well as Sesshomaru wanted to fight off Naraku, but Naraku disappeared. Things just go quite really bad, particularly. when as well as Kagome, Inuyasha, Shippo, and Miroku. Says the medicine's taking effect on Miroku as well. That they're almost back to Lady Kaede's village, particularly when they arrive back. To coin the troubles, particularly how they arrived, particularly to this raccoon-like guy. I forgot his name is in that one. Yeah, that one. Because it's the anthropomorphic raccoon character in this one. We'll get to the characters in just a moment. Later on. So, Inuyasha wanted to know if something how... Oh, he can go something from what they went back. So they went to the Bone Eater's well, right on the area. So Kagome wanted to know something if Inuyasha's okay as well. But she says she's got a little bump, that's all, basically. But because Inuyasha says to put in such danger as well, if he is... Kagome thought that if Inuyasha's running a fever, or if he's recovering from the battle between him and Sesshomaru, until Miroku noticed something if they're on the way all this way into the forest, which is probably in the woods. It's what they do in feudal fairy tales, particularly. If how they wanted to know if Naraku snared Inuyasha in that trap like over 50 years ago, on pulling Sesshomaru's antics of how this goes in its own certain way, particularly. So, if they could escape through the life this time, basically, if Inuyasha's compared to his injuries as well, particularly as how they wanted to know. And its own little matters as well, as from how I understand why. So Inuyasha tells Kagome hold onto this Shikon shard, and he pushed her in through the well, led her back to the current time. And Miroku noticed something that what Inuyasha has done to her as well, and then they thought Kagome is gone, and he says it's her true home. It wasn't long until Kagome's back in the present day Japan, but she wants to go back into him, and she wants to go after Inuyasha, but she can't. It cannot go back because something's going on. Scroll 7, the Spider's Lair. In modern day Japan, Kagome couldn't go back into Inuyasha's time because she knew that Inuyasha might have put the log of the tree into the well. But Shippo has to stop Inuyasha if Kagome wants to come back. But Inuyasha could not want Kagome around as well, particularly. So they wanted to know something if he could ask Miroku to go somewhere if they wanted to defeat Naraku as well, particularly of how they could have figured out to realize of how the recollections of Kikyo had gotten to this. And meanwhile in school, Kagome realized that how she hasn't been in school for a while, basically. How could she figure out if Inuyasha's still there? But she's been always wanted on into something that causes her to snap until she got caught and go stand in the hall as something happens. Meanwhile, Inuyasha's been recovered from the injuries from Lady Kaede as well. They've been asked for a long time since Kikyo has been resurrected from bones in the dirt, of how something recollections from the past ever since Inuyasha has been shot by Kikyo's arrow until her death. It's just the recollections of his memory, particularly of how until inside the cave, particularly of how there's the mystery of the Onigumo, basically of how this goes, like some sort of mystical ways of how this progresses in the story, how its own little recollection of what Inuyasha had a lot to do, particularly he's hunting Naraku if he wants to get the chance to fight Naraku in his own evil antics. Scroll 8, the Shadow of Evil. as this point goes, 50 years of something is called the Onigumo, particularly of how no matter how its own little ghoulish way possession of how if there's someone who has became possessed by a demon particularly, but Inuyasha smells like it's the sense as well. But until something arrived, it was Kikyo arrived, and then Lady Kaede saw Kikyo too, because Kikyo has all shed blood on the face, particularly, but it was basically a trick, particularly. But then Sashomaru killed thing. It was actually like a lizard's abandonment, particularly, because wants to fight off, wants to challenge to fight with Naraku as well, particularly of how this wanted to go, particularly. So Shippo has noticed something until these monsters came around. Something creeps him as well, particularly. And how the Onigumo's wicked heart, like how it's dealing with the devil, on the bound for the demon Naraku as well, until Shippo's running from something, from danger. So Inuyasha has to fight off those creatures with the claws of blood, which Shippo's running from, including the bound until his wound has been reopened as well. So it's the Onigumo, basically, of how they realize of how they fight off that monster, particularly. So he has to use Claws of Demon to fight off those monsters, particularly. Especially of how Moroku has to fight off him if he gets the chance. But it escaped. Because Inuyasha and Moroku could have realized it would have been the minions of Naraku as well, if there's great danger upon. Scroll 9. When We Are Two. Meanwhile, back in present-day Japan, Kagome's still in school, in the gym as well, particularly as how she could figure out if something happened. Especially something from Class B wants to talk to Kagome until the boy that she was with, if he wants to go to a movie with Kagome, particularly if there's any other plans, something after school in its own way. But Kagome couldn't know if it has to do with Inuyasha in the air, particularly as well. If how this has gotten to the point in reviews as well as how basically the decisions goes. If Kagome could figure out of how this goes, particularly if she goes back into the well, if still no sign if they're back in feudal day Japan, Inuyasha could figure out that if the demon trapping scroll is to know if something wants to trap as well. And Inuyasha wanted to know if Kagome's there, particularly but it was actually Shippo playing a trick on it, disguised as to pull off that kind of stunt until Moroku and Lady Kaede arrives. Especially if how there's any interference of how this particularly goes, as how they wanted to things just going quite well, of how something's up for days as well, of how this minions of Naraku has gone for nowhere, with its own its revenge on its own certain ways of how it wants to in the battle with Inuyasha and Roku. If he could have defeated him as well, particularly of how it goes, of how things is going well, of how this progresses, of how it's a healed. Scroll 10, The Pierced Wall. The next day comes and Moroku and Lady Kaede could have realized of something as how it's gone from the nowhere. And until it was that monster arrive, which is something of how they wanted to look for Inuyasha in its own way. Especially in the bloody chaos in the battle, how it goes. But Moroku has to fight off those monster as well. But that monster demon creature only wants to battle Inuyasha, particularly until Inuyasha has to fight off that demon-like monster with the Tetsaiga, particularly. How this goes in the bloody chaos of how the Onigumo, how antics of the Shikon shard as well, because Miroku wants to fight off those until those army of wasp demons arrive. They were basically, Inuyasha knew it was Naraku's wasps as well. So that's how it's gone from not quite well, which is not in a good way. Meanwhile, back in present-day Japan, his mother thought Kagome's on a date with someone, but she could have figured out if she could have understand why. But she wants to go back into feudal day Japan, where Inuyasha's there, but it doesn't work still during the bloody chaos is going. So that's what the story in the Inuyasha as well, because there always has been like a collection on these every short stories for a feudal fairy tale like Inuyasha of how this goes is particularly well. True is that it's something of how Rumiko Takahashi has a lot to do for when she wanted to create of how there's every types of stories. Maybe Inuyasha can be of all these things or any other, then different than any other one as well, with their own credibility of two or less of how lesser of the two stories of how it's been gotten into the ideas. The story was very fantastic. The violent was very bloody, and especially of how Inuyasha wants to fight off the demons until it wants in turn get the Shikon shards as well. The characters are always there because although we got the appearance of Naraku and in that one, but Rin hasn't appeared till later on in the manga, particularly especially Inuyasha as well. For overall, I find this very entertaining for how I'm wanting to know about Inuyasha particularly. Let's give it in the point though as well. My score for the manga, like review for volume 7 of Inuyasha manga, a 10 out of 10 as well. That's my score for the manga review as well. So that's going to be it for today's manga review on Inuyasha for today, you guys. Thank you for watching, but before we go, here's what I'm going to say for this one. I haven't done a review on Inuyasha Volume 7 until now, though. Ever since I have been reviewing 6 volumes of the Inuyasha manga on my previous manga review videos that I did in the past. But this time, this is going to get you covered now that I reviewed 7 volumes as well. Because I'm still on my ongoing. Whenever I can get more volumes of Inuyasha manga, I will be doing the ongoing as well. For the most part as well. Subscribe for content, my Anime Planet link in the description down below. If you want to check out my Anime Planet, the link will be in the description down below. If you want to check out my Anime Planet, because I have a huge backlog of anime as well as manga too as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Let me know if you like as well. Be sure to smack the like button if you enjoy this video. Be sure to click on the subscribe button. Be sure to click on the subscribe button if you haven't checked out my channel as a newcomer. Make sure you click on the subscribe button if you like as well. And also smack the notifications bell button. Be sure to get notified also for more latest updates as well, because I have something new I have for this video as well. For the first time as well. And keep it otaku for this manga review, because I finally reviewed all 7 volumes of the Inuyasha manga as well. Well, because I will be reviewing volume 8 of Inuyasha manga at one point as well, because it's still on the ongoing way as well. But don't worry, I will get more volumes of the Inuyasha manga at one point as well. Although I have some other manga to review after I do my manga reading log as well. This is RuRoniK95 saying thank you for watching my video. I'm glad you liked it. Hope you enjoy it. Hope to see you soon for the next video. Hope you have a great day. This is RuRoniK95 signing off, and thank you for watching my video, and I will see you soon for more videos.